use, abuse, and misuse of optimism bias in civil engineering, how to avoid it. Optimism bias is the inclination of people to anticipate better compared to average results from their activities. Basically, optimism bias in construction projects is the inclination, unknowingly or intentionally, to exaggerate anticipated advantages, and minimize the degree of intricacy of the project, bringing about underestimates of expenses and timetables. Optimism bias can prompt underestimation of the project term, misjudgment of its advantages, and underestimation of its absolute expense. Why optimism bias is used in civil engineering. To work in a highly competitive industry, we really want a sound portion of positivism. However, there is a disadvantage to optimism: it makes blind points and blurs the analytical skills of individuals that they escape the realities. At one point, it can cloud our decisive reasoning and permit us to acknowledge ridiculous presumptions and assessments. One of the significant difficulties for any project is to make a feasible pattern timetable that guarantees the success of the project rather than setting its way for failure. Optimism bias is therefore used in civil engineering projects to prepare the project schedule along with the estimated costs and expected benefits. However, optimism bias ended up being broadly acknowledged as a significant reason for unreasonable scheduling for projects. While setting up the project base, a major concern is the value of the project, for instance, estimated costs and expected profits. One significant way of doing this to be certain of the project value is to really construct it, find whether individuals use it, and check whether it has the ideal impact. What's more, we have the confusion of isolating the impacts of the change from different changes we make simultaneously. We can isolate the difference among appraisals and actuals into two sections: bias and random changeability. Bias appears when we sum up and measure the float from the real. It is widely known that in civil engineering projects optimism bias prompts evaluations of project terms that are around 20% more limited than real and with cost overwhelms of around half, even after a thorough conducted analysis. Strategy for calculating optimism bias for cost. The following are the primary steps that are to be taken when calculating optimism bias for cost in a civil engineering project. 1. Establish the reference class and the kind of project. 2. Settle on the phase of the project. 3. Settle on the appropriate upper-headed value for optimism bias given for the project. 4. Determine the contributory variables to the upper bound optimism bias for the venture kind. 5. Complete risk evaluation of the contributory elements, knowing the relief factor, somewhere in the range of 0 and 1, and the cost of risk management. 6. Include the successfully overseen commitments to the optimism bias for each venture risk area. 7. Calculate the updated optimism bias percent, capital effect of optimism bias, the expensive risk diminution, and the modified capital appraisal. Why optimism bias is exploited. According to the Construction Industry Institute, often projects experience the ill effects of over-optimism, bringing out below-par project performance. Project funding is sanctioned based on the stated project schedule. Through optimism bias, the desired date is achieved by which funding for the project can be approved. But the problem comes when in reality, the project fails to complete at the announced date. This is the most common exploitation of optimism bias. This is a common practice that can be seen in infrastructure development of highways, water rehabilitation, local infrastructure projects, roads structure, and rail construction. The huge investments made on infrastructure construction projects give people immense hopes of economic development in the areas where these projects are intended to build. However, when the same projects are not completed in the given time and fail to provide value, they add disappointment to the hopes of people and waste the state's money. Municipal heads and people want these ventures finished and subsidized as planned. Yet the application of optimism bias put the project managers at risk of acknowledging unreasonable suppositions. How to avoid the risk of optimism bias? If you are commanded to convey an essential venture by a certain culmination date, or at an ensured maximum cost, in such a case, the best way to secure your project against optimism bias is to deploy a formal risk management procedure. While implementing the risk management procedure, go through a list of required points for effective risk management. Accomplishing expansive partner commitment and contribution in risk evaluation and risk detection. Risk management procedure permit examination of project presumptions and appraisals by all undertaking partners and not simply project leaders. The deployment of best procedures to give everybody a voice in risk evaluation and risk detection. Utilizing lessons gained from comparable projects as a feature of our risk management procedure. Assure execution of effective risk feedback.